morning, good day, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're from and the time you're listening to this. Welcome to Peas in the Pod. I'll be your host for this segment where we'll be talking about the implications of urban policies in the urban spaces. In today's podcast, we interview Professor Sarah Charlton. Professor Sarah Charlton is an associate professor teaching in the School of Architecture and Planning at Wits. Her key research area is on forms of low-income housing and homelessness. Sarah explores ways in which the poor people make use of the city, with particular interest in the geographies of their home and work. She's also interested in state interventions in infrastructure, including low-income housing, and in people's responses to these. She has worked on various policy and strategy documents for different spheres of the government. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to the interview. So, the first thing I was going to ask that you please give us a brief about your interest in urban and regional planning.
My interest in it?
Yes.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that. What are you wanting me to talk about?
What are your interests like? What are you interested in the field of urban and regional planning?
I'm interested in the intersection between state infrastructure and ordinary people's practices. So that's one of the things I'm interested in. So when government does, when they build something or they deliver something or they introduce a way of doing something like operating a transport system or something like that, I'm interested in the ideas that government has about that, and in how people are responding, how it works in their lives. I'm also interested in how ordinary people make lives in urban areas. So how and where they find housing, how and where they find work, how they move around the city, etc. Yeah,
okay, thank you. Thank you so much. In follow to that, would you please provide an overview of the Breaking New Ground policy and its objectives?
I actually haven't read the policy for a long time, so I don't think I can really speak to that. One of the key aspects of it was around doing integrated human settlements. So a lot of focus on the idea of perhaps mixed use, mixed income. In other words, that notion of integration needs to be interpreted and understood. But I think part of the idea was mixed use and mixed income, and that was a reaction to the earlier generation of housing projects that were criticized for being too aimed at too much at the same income group and not really having other facilities and amenities. I have to point out that the original housing policy did provide for other facilities and amenities to be part of the housing projects. They are planned that way. There is space allocated for it, but the other kinds of facilities and amenities were very slow in coming. I think, yeah, okay, let me stop there.
Okay. So in other words, the BNG doesn't really promote other mixed uses, however it provides mixed housing types only.
No, I'm saying it was also, as far as I understand, or as far as I can remember, part of that notion of integration was mixed use. Not just mixed income. So I said mixed income and mixed use.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the clarification. Okay. So in terms of the partnership and collaboration, how does the BNG emphasize
participations between different stakeholders?
Again, I can't really speak to the B&G because I haven't read it for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe
Okay.
can you ask the question in a different way or more generally or something like that? Or yeah. I don't know. Or do you want to move on to the next one?
We can move to the next question, no problem. We should some of follow up, but then I'll make it a general question. So, Sarah, how do you think the policies could influence the establishment and growth of home-based businesses in peripheral areas?
Sorry, say again. The first part? How do I think the policy?
Yes, different policies can influence or establish the growth of home-based businesses in different urban peripheral areas.
Okay, so maybe to start with that when I think B&G was promoting mixed use, I don't think it was necessarily thinking about home-based businesses. So for me, it's a bit of a leap to go from the idea of B&G promoting mixed use to the idea of home-based businesses, because the two are not necessarily the same thing. So I think B&G might have been promoting a whole variety of activities and land uses to happen within a settlement, but exactly how and where that would happen was maybe not clear and maybe didn't clearly think about home-based businesses. But to get back to your question, how could home-based businesses be promoted?
Yes,
you said in policy in peripheral areas, particularly, yes, or anywhere.
It could be anywhere.
Okay, so if we're talking about housing developments or areas that are new neighborhoods that are created for housing, I think a start would be for the planners and all of those involved in developing the area, and that might include a whole range of actors that get involved in making a project happen. So that might include engineers and a developer themselves, in other words, an organization that takes the risk on the project and is putting the money in, and government, all of those. Acknowledging that home-based businesses are very likely to happen. So step one would be to kind of acknowledge it and confront this phenomenon and the likelihood of it persisting and growing, and even to go further than that and to see what could be positive about it, the way in which it can add positively to the environment that's being created in these new developments, in the sense of enlivening them and also providing services and goods locally to people. So acknowledging all of that firstly, and then secondly, thinking about and then building into the designs of the whole area, such as the layout, such as the positioning of the house on the yard, how the house gets positioned on the yard. So thinking about how those kinds of things can facilitate a variety of changes that might happen through people's own initiatives on site, and that will include home-based businesses. It might also include extra rooms being built on the yard, whether that's for rental or family members. So thinking about how the house is positioned on the yard, how the house is positioned relative to the street, what space is available to do these kinds of things. Thinking about whether the infrastructure that's being provided can cope with additional use that it might be put to, what it means that in fact the building footprint or the coverage is going to increase because additional structures are going to be built. And then not just in terms of kind of design of the area and infrastructure, but also how these kind of additions, alterations, extra structures connected to home-based businesses and other kinds of things, how those are going to happen over time. So what I'm driving at here is
community engagements, probably.
Well, yes, but that term gets used a lot, and one needs to unpack what it means in any particular context, what it looks like, what would that actually be. But really, where I was going with my comment is that there could be a lot of facilitation on the ground. What I mean by that is having people available who can guide individual households about perhaps how best to position these kind of structures in such a way that they don't encroach on infrastructure or pipe work, perhaps even assist with guidance around building materials or sizes that are compliant with municipal regulations. So kind of advice and assistance and guidance. So I'm not saying regulation and I'm not saying just impose the municipal rules and procedures for getting approval as they currently are. I'm suggesting something much more nuanced in the settlement itself, that involves assisting people, recognizing people might be doing things incrementally over time, may not have money to do it in a compliant way up front, but perhaps how it's positioned on the site could at least be a step towards that. So, there have been experiments like that in the past. So in the Cato Manor development, they did have these kinds of sort of people helping, also just with people extending their houses, and what are useful ways to do that doesn't interfere too much with your neighbor, doesn't create unsafe conditions. So I'm sort of extending that idea to home-based businesses, and there may be people who are just doing this anyway in their houses and they don't need or they don't want to engage with people.
Yes.
But there may be other people for whom it is a useful service. And in somewhere like Cosmo City, the developer did provide this kind of guidance after people moved into their houses, particularly for backyard dwellings, about trying to encourage people to do those in a way that sort of would result long term in a functioning neighborhood. I don't know how many years they did that, and at what point it all fell away, because the responsibility for that was supposed to be then the municipality, not the developer in the long term. So there's lots to think about, but the overall point I'm making is that there is recognizing that all of this is going to happen, seeing the positive in it, then designing as far as possible the layout, the infrastructure, the positioning of the houses on their yards in such a way that sort of anticipates that this is going to happen and that works best, allows it to happen in the best possible way. And then thirdly, after people move in and start doing it, seeing how best to help and guide things that one results in a as functional and positive an environment as possible.
Thank you. I'm glad that you spoke about the support of infrastructure and services, because in one of my readings or points, I had a point that stated that as planners we could look into, since we also like moving into an AI space or the fourth industrialization, we should also like accommodate the idea of having high-speed internet connectivity in such businesses as an upgrade to what's happening, and also to catch up with the globalization. I'm also glad that you spoke about the designing of the area, because that's another point that was made in terms of how do we as planners somehow bring back the ground the ground planning whereby the people are also involved in it. Yeah. Thank you. I felt like you also answered the other questions about how planners could bring nuanced ideas into the whole idea of approaching business, home-based businesses, only not through policy, but also through implicating them and clear guidance and providing clear guidelines and standards on how to actually have perimeters such as noise levels, customers, and balancing the needs of businesses with residential character of the area.
Yeah, just a comment on your point about high-speed internet. I think that would be incredibly useful for people for all sorts of reasons, not just for home-based businesses, but people generally trying to connect with the world, job seeking, training themselves online, all of that kind of thing. So I think that is incredibly important. It's not so easy for me to comment because I don't understand enough about it, about how that kind of infrastructure can be built into these developments, because obviously in our current context, a lot of that seems to be run by private companies. In other words, the infrastructure network seems to be run by private companies using cell phone masts, etc., etc. But what could really help is that there is free Wi-Fi made available by the municipality in municipal-run spaces in these developments, whether it's a community clinic,
a
library or a school or whatever, and that those are places where people could go to get free Wi-Fi. Now, that wouldn't particularly help a home-based business needing to, I don't know, do some kind of online transaction with a customer, because it might not be in the right space, but if it might help them and in other ways if they needed to go and place orders or something like that, and it might well help other people. So maybe there are ways in which that kind of infrastructure could be extended more widely, but I think it is important.
Also, Sarah, just a point of view on the idea that I wouldn't say home-based, but basically how evasive entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship that's informal shapes the institution and policy. What's your comment on that statement?
How it shapes what?
How the ever informality that's occurring shapes how policy is now formed, how decisions are made at the end.
I think it does eventually inform policy, but it can be very slow for policy to respond to what's actually happening in its own environment. There are examples of housing projects where the zoning, for example, is anticipates that this kind of thing is going to happen, and allows for a whole range of land uses to occur in the residential area without needing permission. So there are examples in the Alex Renewal project, the Alex Renewal program, which had multiple different initiatives within the Alex area, but some of those were new housing developments on Alex East Bank, and in some of those they were just doing a blanket zoning. That meant, that unless you were doing a land use in your yard that might be problematic for your neighbors or something like that, unless you were doing something like that, then you did have permission without going and applying for permission. You did have permission to do a whole lot of things anyway, just in the zoning. So that kind of thing is useful. And I don't know that has been extended very widely elsewhere, but there are some examples of that. There's an honours student from a few years ago who did some work on home-based businesses in an RDP development on the West Rand, and she was also investigating how does the municipality respond to to things. And it seems like sometimes actually on the ground what the municipality responds to are complaints from neighbours about particularly problematic things. Like if someone's complaining about a tavern playing loud music all night or whatever, then there'll be a complaint and then the municipality might respond. So it's very reactive rather than proactive.
I agree with you, and that's very insightful about the Alexandra renewal program.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I think you've already answered this question, which was, can you share any personal experiences or examples of how urban planning policies have affected the establishment or operation or expansion of home-based businesses? I think you've already answered that.
Yeah. I think just that Alex example, I haven't personally been involved, but I did interview one of the Alex Renewal people some years ago who mentioned that. And I supervised that student who was doing that work. And last year there was also a master's student doing work on home-based enterprises in Ivory Park. And his research should be available in the library now because his examination results have just come through. And he also interviewed officials in the city of Johannesburg who spoke about basically responding if there's a problem being raised, but otherwise sort of not having the capacity to get involved in managing the kind of thing that is actually happening on the ground.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the interview. It was very insightful. I've gained a lot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Angelina. Okay, good. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
Bye.